Let me say something about democracy in general. I use the term substantive democracy, which has four dimensions or four forms. One is the procedural democracy, which is really the basis of any democracy. You cannot have any democracy without procedural democracy. And then we have liberal democracy, which has to do not with procedures and institutions, but with absolute values, like freedom, decency, and so forth. And then we have consociational democracy, which has to do with collective right that you give to groups. And then we have social democracy, which means what we are concerned about, socioeconomic inequalities, solidarity, and so forth. I'm going to talk about procedural and liberal democracy, and also to some extent to consociational democracy. So if you talk about the democracy, you have to talk about the four dimensions. So you get a comprehensive view of democracy. Now, what you don't see really in the literature, these are other forms of democracy, or lack of democracy. That's ethnic democracy. This is a special type, which I will touch on, which is very relevant from my point of view to Israel. And then ethnocracy, which is also, it is a form of really of non-democracy, which combines ethnicity with subordinated groups. Okay, so this is my general review, and see what I can cover. Now, since I'm talking about Israeli democracy, I have to explain what I mean by Israel. It is not, again, taken for granted. I'm going to refer to Israel only to the entity within the pre-67 borders. So it doesn't include Gaza, does not include the West Bank, does not include the Golan Heights, and does not include East Jerusalem. So I'm talking about democracy only with regard to Israeli citizens. Most Arabs in East Jerusalem are not citizens, so then we cannot really talk about democracy about them. Now, if you feel that you cannot separate Israel within the Green Line, with Israel, from the West Bank and from Gaza, then really, if you consider all this area from the sea to the Jordan River as one entity, then there is no point, from my point of view, to talk about democracy at all, because it's clear for me it's not a democracy, and there is not much to discuss. Then you can discuss if it is apartheid, if it's not apartheid, but not the question of democracy, I think, does not come up. So I'm talking about Israel only in the pre-67 borders. Okay, let me say my central thesis. My central thesis is that Israel faces structural impediments for maintaining a democracy. Israel is not a first-class democracy, and I'm going to say something much more. Israel cannot be a first-class democracy. Why it cannot be? For 5 reasons. And these reasons, they are structural, have to do with the context in Israel, and the structure of Israel, the goals of Israel, and has nothing to do with the political culture of people, the attitude of the people. Say the people are very democratic. Okay, so they are not democratic, but there are structures which prevent Israel from becoming or being a first-rate democracy. Now, what are these? First, that Israel is a deeply divided society. It's not just divided society. Almost every society in the world today is divided. So that's nothing special about a society to say they are divided. But Israel belongs to a minority of societies in the world today which are deeply divided. And it's deeply divided in two areas, between Arabs and Jews, and between religious and secular. There are many other divisions, but they are not that divided. And usually deeply divided societies have a problem or temptation of a tyranny of the majority. So you have a minority, and it's deeply divided from the mainstream, and then the majority is tempted to reduce the rights of the minority, because it doesn't, usually in deeply divided society there is not mutual trust between the minority and the majority. So that's what we have in Israel today, especially between Arabs and Jews. Secondly, we have the Israeli-Arab conflict and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Now, if you have a conflict which is intractable and long, very long conflict, you cannot maintain a first-class democracy. There is no way, because if you have such continuing belligerency of a society, you need to reduce freedoms and rights of people in order to control the situation, in order to defend the country, and so forth. So that's another important reason. The third reason, that's state and religion in Israel. In all Western societies today, you have de facto separation between state and religion. And in Israel, you don't have de facto separation. Religion is embedded in public life, and there is a lot, and because of that, there is a lot of coercion, religious coercion, and then this reduces democracy. And the fourth is the Zionist character of the state. Not just the Jewish character of the state, but the Zionist character of the state. And I explain why the Zionist character of the state reduce the possibility of maintaining a liberal democracy. And finally, Israel has been dominated since 1977 by the political right, and the political right differs from the political center and left by less commitment to democracy. And this means that's a structure. I mean, it's not just because they have a good intentions or bad intentions. That's their agenda. That's the way they think, and they want to streamline society in which the Jewish and Zionist character of the state will be superior to its democracy. So these are now, please do not think about each of these factors as single factors. They are a configuration of factors, and the configuration has a special power which reduces possibilities to maintain a democracy. For this reason, I'm claiming, when I take all the four dimensions of Israeli democracy, I'm claiming that Israeli democracy, a hybrid democracy, which I call ethnic democracy. An ethnic democracy, as the way I see it, is a democracy which is based on two contradictory principles. The principle of civil rights for all and the contradictory principle of the superiority of ethno-national group, I mean the Jewish group. And the two are colliding all the time, and this is what reduces the intensity of Israeli democracy. I am also claiming at the same time that Israel is a democracy. I mean, there are scholars, and of course in the public sphere, there are people who are claiming that Israel is not democracy at all. So I'm claiming that Israel is democracy, but a democracy of a second rate because of all the structural impediments. Let's start now. Doesn't move. Okay. Now let's start with the procedural democracy. I think we can do it very quickly. Israel is clearly a procedural democracy. This is what I said. It is the basis of any democracy. It has all the characteristics of procedural democracy, like civil rights for all, separation of powers, free media, impartial judiciary, and military under civilian control, and so forth. Israel, clearly, it's a democracy, and this is why I'm saying that all this claim that Israel is not a democracy, I think they are baseless, because Israel is, at least, is procedural democracy. But even as a procedural democracy, which provides everyone with freedoms and individual rights, it's not really fully procedural democracy. Even that, is not fully correct to say, because there is restriction in Israel about the right to establish a political party. There is a restriction on the right to vote. There is a right to be elected. There is a restriction about the right to buy land, and so forth. There is a law in Israel saying that in order to run to parliament, you have to establish a party, and to establish a party, there's a restriction. You cannot deny Israel as the homeland of the Jewish people. If you do that, you cannot register, then you cannot run for elections, then you cannot be elected, and you cannot vote. If you feel that Israel, you have to change Israel's Jewish character, you cannot vote for such a party, because such a party will not exist. So, but I think all these restrictions still do not deny Israel as a procedural democracy. But let's go to the real issue. If Israel is a liberal democracy, and now this is what I'm talking about, the comparative perspective, most of the Western democracies are liberal, like Britain, like France, like Germany, like the US, and so forth. Some of them are what we call consociational, not liberal, like Belgium, Switzerland, Canada, New Zealand, where they don't only give individual rights, but also give collective rights, like in Belgium, which is a binational state. In Switzerland, you have 3 languages recognized, also the same in Canada, between the Quebecois, the French-speaking and the English-speaking, and also in New Zealand, the Maoris are accepted as a separate nationality, and so forth, and giving us all kinds of collective rights. So now I'm asking, is Israel like the United States, like France, like UK, and so forth? Okay, so what is a liberal democracy? It's a liberal democracy, it's a democracy which has not just procedural institutions like procedural democracy, but also absolute values. The values of equality, liberty, dignity, respect, justice, and so forth, and it provides opportunity for every individual to fulfill himself or herself. That's the whole idea of liberalism, that you have the freedom to pursue your interests and your values and so forth. So the whole question of human rights, which is very central, and also protection of minorities as individual rights, and so forth. And doesn't matter who is the majority. You mean the elections do not change. They change who is ruling, for the next 4 years. But the election and whoever the majority in the parliament cannot reduce equality or liberty or dignity. These are absolute rights that you cannot touch. That's the whole idea of liberalism. Okay. Now let's see about Israel. Israel claims to be a liberal democracy. It's a Jewish and democratic state, but it's just a liberal democracy. It's part of the West. It's the only democracy in the Middle East. Prides itself, and this is the way it's presented in the social sciences literature about Israel. Now let me now go over and see what are the limitations on Israel as a liberal democracy. First of all, Israel has no constitution. They tried to write a constitution, but they did not. And then in 1992, they have two basic laws: the human dignity and liberty, and basic law of freedom of occupation. And then the Supreme Court declares that this, on the basis of these two laws, there is a constitutional revolution, that Israel behaves like but when you see the record of the Supreme Court since 1992, with all this talks about revolution, you see it really the Supreme Court did not intervene in most of the cases, and they did not really change much the situation. So if you don't have a constitution, you don't have sufficient protection of individual rights and minorities. That's the idea of a constitution. Now, Great Britain also does not have a constitution, but has, centuries of rulings, or traditions of democracy which helps. And Israel does not have this tradition. Now let's take another obstacle which has to do with the Israeli-Arab conflict. Israel was declared in 1948 as emergency situation because there was a war. In every war, countries declare a state of emergency, but Israel since then has never lifted it. In Israel today, there is emergency situation. It's a permanent emergency situation. Every 6 months, the Knesset ratifies, extended every 6 months. So it's really permanent. You can say, okay, just this is on paper. It's not really, doesn't matter. But it does, because the military in Israel has sweeping powers. But just by injunction of the commander, of the military commander of any region, they can do many things. They can suspend any democratic right. They can expropriate land. They can restrict a person movement. They can have administrative detention. I mean, it can do anything. They can close an area and declare it as closed area for military purposes, and so forth and so forth. And they have used this before. Just recently, they used this situation to outlaw the Islamic movement. That's 2015. They outlaw and before they outlawed the Kahana party, this radical party. So this is another. Now let's think about religious coercion. You know, in Israel there is a millet system, like in Iran, like in Egypt, like in any Muslim country today, in which this means that um, uh, the state puts every person, every citizen into one religion. So, and they don't ask you. You are a Jew or you are a Muslim, you are a Christian or a Druze or any. And then you get your basic rights about your personal status. If you are married or divorced, the custody of children and so forth, through your religious administration. So Israel has no civil rights on divorce. There is no public transportation on Shabbat and Jewish holidays. If you send your children to state schools, secular state schools, you get so much religion in secular schools. About consumption of kosher foods or buying kosher foods is also limited, cemeteries and so forth. And I think it's very clear. I mean, there is a lot of religious coercion, which means restriction of the right to marry or to get divorced, and especially who is suffering from that? It's women usually, and less men. Now, Israel also, as a democracy, has what I call Jewish exclusivity. This means it's exclusively Jewish. Now, many countries you have also symbols of this kind, of another kind, and so forth. Israel is strictly Jewish in its systems and its policies and so forth. For example, Israel has the right. It has the law of return. That's everyone knows. It gives only to Jews the right to settlement in Israel and the right of immediate citizenship. You don't have to naturalize. You come, you settle, and you are a citizen. But Israel has also a law of immigration for non-Jews, and Israel hardly uses this law. So if you are not a Jew and you want to immigrate to Israel, you have a law, but it will be very hard for you to get the right of immigration and naturalization. Israel has no asylum law. So you cannot, in Israel, submit an application as asylum seeker, because Israel has not enacted a law. Israel signed the treaty about asylum, but never had a law, because Israel does not want asylum seekers to become citizens of Israel. If they are Jews, then they are welcome. Law of return. If they are not Jews, then there is a problem. And we have today about 50,000 Africans. Most of them live in south of Tel Aviv, who Israel treats them as infiltrators and does not give them the status of asylum seekers. They see themselves as asylum seekers, but they are rejected. Okay. So the exclusivity, really where you can see the exclusivity most bluntly, is that Arabs in Israel are really not part of the national power structure. They are not included in the government coalition. They are not included in the top power of ministries and so forth. But the real issue, all what I said so far, really, compared with what I'm going to say now, it's minor, subordinate to what I'm saying. That the Zionist character of the states. please pay attention to this. I'm talking about the Zion character. I'm not talking about the Jewish character. Because the Jewish character, to say that Israel is a Jewish nation state, has the right of self-determination of the Jews, and can be a Jewish nation state, like, say, German nation state, like a British nation state, and so on. That's not, I don't see that as problematic as democracy is concerned. So I'm talking about now Zionism, because Israel is not just Jewish, Israel is Zionist. Now, what I mean by Zionist, Israel declares itself as the homeland of the Jewish people, the entire Jewish people. 57% of the Jews do not live in Israel. They are neither citizens nor residents of Israel. But Israel belongs to them. They own Israel. All the Jews, wherever they are, in Israel or in the diaspora, all of them are the owners of the state of Israel. So if you are a non-Jew and you are an Israeli citizen, you don't own the state. So you are some kind of outsider. Now, all this is not just declaration. All this also has to do with the law of return, which is restricted to Israel. Now, you can see in the literature, jurists and others claiming that you can find law of return among Western countries, among other democracies, like Poland, like Greece, Germany. You know, Germany is the best case. But when you compare the law of return with other cases, you see the Israeli law of return is extreme. It goes into really the extreme dimension. What I mean is that if you are a Jew, wherever you live, you have the right of return. It doesn't matter if you are under stress, if you are a refugee, you are not. It doesn't. Now in Germany, the law of return, which is the closest that you can come to the Israeli case, if you live in the West, if you live in the United States or Britain, you don't have the right of repatriation to Germany. You have the right of repatriation in Germany only if you were in the Soviet bloc under stress, or Romania, communist Romania, and so forth. But not if you live in France or in UK or in the United States. I mean, in Israel, it doesn't matter. Every Jew qualifies. And then there is a law which restricts the Arabs in Israel right of family union. If an Arab in Israel marries a woman from Gaza or from the West Bank, that's okay. He can live with her in Gaza or the West Bank. He cannot bring her to Israel and live with her in Israel. This law was enacted in 2003. It was challenged many times in the Supreme Court, and it was not repealed by the Supreme Court. Now, all this political demographic policies that Israel has in its laws, of course, you have to complement them with the denial of repatriation of Palestinian refugees. So the Palestinian refugees, we are talking about 5.5 million Palestinians who live in the diaspora, the Palestinian diaspora, who do not have the right of repatriation. So the Zionist character of the state, means that Israel as a state has the duty, the goal and duty to preserve a Jewish majority and also to increase it as much as it can. But that's not all the story of the Zionist character of the state. Let's see other features of the Zionist character of the state. Israel signed in the 50s a treaty, an agreement with Karen Kayemet, the Jewish National Fund, and with the Jewish Agency, and these two institutions, which cater only to the Jews. They have state legitimacy or state status, and they give a lot of services to the Jews only. Well, that's another thing about the Jewish character of the state. But let's see what are the supreme goals of Zionism as far as Israel is concerned. Zionism also, by its goals, is aiming to prevent assimilation between Jews and non-Jews. Now bring me an example of any Western democracy, liberal democracy in the West, where the ethos, the liberal ethos is against assimilation of people. I mean, the whole idea of liberalism, that the individual have the option to associate with anyone, to marry anyone, and they have the law of civil marriage and divorce. In Israel, the ethos, the Zionist ethos, is to prevent assimilation. This is to begin with why Zionism started, to save the Jews from anti-Semitism and also from assimilation. And then the idea of Zionism, that the Jews are still under threats, and you need a Jewish state in order to save the Jews from these three threats. The threats are of the extension of the Jews. The Jews will disappear. So the Israeli state has the right, has the duty to save the Jews from assimilation and from disappearance and from anti-Semitism and so forth, and then also to protect Israel from the Arab world, which wants to destroy it, and also to save the Jews, Israel from the Arab potential fifth column. But, and this is my bottom point, Zionism means in Israel that Israel will remain Jewish forever. That's the whole idea of Israeli Zionism. It's not just that Israel today is a Jewish state, but the duty of the state to ensure that Israel will remain Jewish forever. Now, this is against the whole idea of liberalism. Liberalism, that people can cooperate and make, they try to convince each other, and they create a new majority to change, say, the character of the state. Here, you cannot do it, because the state will block any effort on part of the population to change its character. And it has laws also to help her to do such. So this is what I'm saying, but let me get another point. Oh, gee, I have to do more, to be more quickly. I see that. Okay, we have liberal democracy and occupation. Listen, I mean, to argue that Israel is a liberal democracy and you have occupation for 50 years and you have no plans to terminate it. No plans. The government has never had any plan to terminate occupation. And people are stateless for 50 years and so forth. It does not square well with liberalism and liberal democracy. So, is Israel then a liberal democracy? Yes, they have some features of Israel as a liberal democracy. I'm not really denying it. A lot, I give you here many scholars who claim that Israel is a liberal democracy, like Jacobson and Rubinstein, Neuberger, Doughty, and so forth. They say, okay, we know that there are some, no democracy is perfect. So Israel is also not a perfect, and so on, but they are not really coping with all what I said about the structural impediments. Now, I give you now in summary, the list of why Israel is not a liberal democracy, because it's not a state of its citizens, it's a state of the Jewish people. It doesn't allow a politicization of the population to change its Jewish and Zionist character, provides preferential treatment to Jews. Then another point which has also to do with Zionism, that in every civic society, a civic democracy, liberal democracy, you create a civic nation. All American citizens, they belong to the American people. They are a people. The Jews included, doesn't matter which religion, what race, what ethnicity, and so forth. Everyone is part of the civic nation. Israel is against the creation of civic nation. And this question was taken to the Supreme Court, because some people said, please register me as an Israeli, not as a Jew. I'm not a Muslim, I'm not a Druze, I'm not Christian, I'm not a Jew. I am an Israeli. This is a civic nation, There is a civic nation, and the Supreme Court said, well, how can we register you? There is no such thing. There is no such thing. That was, and it's true. There is no such thing, That's because Zionism is against the creation of such possibility. Then you have religious coercion, and then you have an ethos which is against assimilation. All this are non-liberal. Now the question if Israel is a non-democracy, let me just go very quickly on that. There is argument that Israel is not a democracy. Why it's not democracy? First of all, because every democracy is based on the principle of equality. You don't find in Israel a basic law about equality. The two basic laws which exist, which were enacted in 1992, they don't use the term equality. And the draft of these laws, there was equality, was taken off. So Israel does not use the term equality because there is no equality. And Israel does not want to have equality, because that's against the Zionist character of the state. You want to make a difference between the Jew and non-Jew. You have to give the Jew something more than you give the others. The country belongs just to the Jews. It doesn't belong to non-Jews, and so forth. So they are saying that if this is a political system not based on equality of citizens, then it's not a democracy. It's a system which is geared to serve Jews only. So it's not. So that's what I'm saying. They are also saying that there is no demos here. There is no territorial demos. In order to have a democracy, you have to have everyone who lives in the area, all the citizens who live in the state, they are the owners of the state. And Israel says, no, they are not the owners of the state. So there is no territorial demo. For this, they are saying, so what about procedural democracy? They are saying it is just superficial procedures, do not make a really difference. So don't take this seriously. So Israel is not a democracy. So now these are my reasons why Israel is a democracy, and I reject the idea that Israel is ethnocracy, which is not a democracy. I think Israel is a procedural democracy. It's much seriously. Arabs in Israel have the right to struggle, and they struggle very intensely, and they do not face repression by the state, which shows, and also their struggle makes a difference. They do improve their situation over the years. And Israel distinguishes in its policies between Palestinians who are citizens within the Green Line and Palestinians who are not citizens, and so forth. So for this reason, I think Israel is a democracy, and also Israel is giving collective rights to the Arabs. The right to have a separate education in Arabic, the right to keep their religion, and also they have collective religious rights and linguistic rights and so forth. Now, is Israel a constitution? Now I'm started with procedural democracy, went to liberal democracy, and now I'm going to constitutional democracy. And I'll do it very fast because I would like to arrive to the question of ethnic democracy. Constitutional democracy, to some extent, Israel is a constitutional democracy. We can say it's a semi-constitutional democracy. And it is semi-constitutional democracy vis-à-vis the national religious minority, and also vis-à-vis the Haredi, the ultra-Orthodox minority. It's not even constitutional democracy toward Arabs, only to this two Jewish religious minorities. It gives them a separate educational system, which means it recognizes their culture and their separate values, the religious values and so forth, and provides them with a system of education to perpetuate, to transmit their values and culture to the second generation, and fully funded by the state. The state funded, and not only that, not only they give them the separate educational system, but also let them control it. So the Haredim and the Datiyim in Israel also control their system of education. They have also cultural institutions and so forth. And they are part of the government. Usually they are in the coalition government and so forth. So they have these features. But unlike, say, when you compare Israel to Belgium or Canada or New Zealand and so forth, this is only some features of constitutionalism. It's not full-fledged. Israel does not say that we recognize the Datiyim or the Haredim as separate groups, and we as separate group, they have the right to their identity, and we are going by law to give them such and such share of the budget and so forth. It's not done as it's done in other countries, but it has some of this feature. Now the Arabs in Israel, who are a national minority, are denied the right to autonomy, to cultural autonomy, to educational autonomy. They have separate schools fully funded by the state, but they don't control their schools, they don't control their curriculum, and they don't control the appointment of their teachers and their principals and so forth. So Israel is a constitutional democracy to some extent. So I'm saying that Israel is a hybrid democracy. It is a procedural democracy, not full procedural democracy, but by and large. And it has some components of liberal democracy. It has some components of constitutional democracy, but it is by and large what I call ethnic democracy. What I mean by ethnic democracy? I mean that it is a system in which there are two principles. One principle of civil rights for all, and the other principle is ethnic superiority. And this is the Jewish superiority of the system. This means there is no equality. Clearly the Jews are privileged, and there is a privileged majority. The majority control the state, owns the state. But at the same time, the minority, and we are talking about mainly now about the Palestinian Arab minority, it has the rights, the political rights. They have the right of movement, the right of association, the right to vote, all this they do. But at the same time, they are limited. They don't have the right to change the system, to de-Zionist the state, to Judaize the state, because the system is closed. Zionism closed down the system. It's like a black box, that's Israel. It's Jewish, Zionist, and that's it. You cannot change it. You can fight how much Jewish it will be, how much Zionist will be, but you cannot fight over to make it un-Jewish and Zionist. So this is what I call ethnic democracy, and as ethnic democracy, I think it is viable. The criticism I always have about this model that this is not a viable system. A system in which you have such a contradiction, and I say it's a contradiction, in which the Arab minority does not enjoy equality, they will not accept the system, they don't give any legitimacy to the system, they will fight the system, and finally the system will collapse. I said, look, Israel now exists for 70 years, and it's, the system is quite stable, and I don't see why it's going to collapse. But when I compare Israel with other ethnic democracies, and there are other ethnic democracies, Israel is the extreme case. Israel is the harder case. What are the other? I don't have time to go into the other cases, but I have been working on a comparative study of Israel with Macedonia, with Slovakia, with Estonia, and also with Northern Ireland from 1921 to 1974. But now Northern Ireland collapsed. The system is an ethnic democracy, collapsed. In Macedonia, it changed a bit in 2001, where you have a gradual approach to binationalism, so it changed. But in Estonia, in Slovakia, and Israel, the system has not changed. Now, all these countries, they claim to be Western. All of them, Israel and Estonia, claim to be democratic, liberal democracies, because it's a good word to use. And all of them have national minorities. All of them, the majority is hegemonic. It claims full ownership of the state. That's in Estonia vis-à-vis the Russian speakers. And in Slovakia vis-à-vis the Hungarians. In Macedonia vis-à-vis the Albanians. And in Northern Ireland vis-à-vis the Catholics, the Protestants vis-à-vis them. All of them claim, that this belongs to the majority. The state belongs to the majority. Now, why the Israeli case is harder than all this? Because in Israel, to be a Jew, the affiliation to this category of the majority, the Jewish majority, is through religion and ethnicity and nationhood. You have three features in one. That is the unity of the of Jewishness. If you are a Jew, by religion, you are automatically belong to the Jewish people. And automatically also you have a common ethnicity with other Jews. Now, in the other countries, it's not. Your affiliation is mostly linguistic, ethnic and linguistic. So if you are an Estonian, your language is Estonian, and you belong to the ethnic group, Estonian, so on. So it's much easier to overcome. It's much easier to move to the other group. And also the other reason is, in all these countries, this state encourages assimilation. Not only that assimilation is permitted, they encourage assimilation into the majority. In Israel, it's against assimilation. It doesn't have the civil marriage and divorce, and Zionism is against assimilation. So it's very hard. It's very hard. Now, the distinction between a Jew and Arab in Israel is not only religion, it's language, it's religion, it's culture, it's identity, it's family ties. I mean, it's very hard for an Arab to assimilate into a Jew. It's against the ethics of the country and so forth. So the Israeli case is of an ethnic democracy. So I presented to you a system, political system in Israel, which is really unmatched. It is a system that you cannot export. I mean, it's something very unique, quite unique. It's a democratic system, but it's quite restricted democratic system. And I think we have to face it as intellectuals, as Israelis, and as Jews in general. And maybe let me end with a happy note. With all this impediments on Israeli democracy, you can say that Israeli democracy is really very, very good. Because you measure it, you measure it against the potential, against the obstacles. So if you don't have all these obstacles, you can have easily a democracy. But Israel has to struggle against all these impediments and maintain a democracy. So it's doing very well then, compared with all these obstacles. So that's another way of looking at that. Not only to say that Israel is really it's a second-rate democracy, but you can say on the backdrop of all these obstacles, Israel as a democracy is viable and it's doing very well. Thank you.